Good morning, my friends. Grim here. I hope all is well, and welcome to another 10-minute deck tech. This one features Premodern Green-White Enchantress, which has got to be one of the most intense decks in the format in terms of just how powerful and how difficult to contend with it can be when you're going off. So if you love having a disgusting amount of permanents on this side of the battlefield, especially ones that your opponent might not be able to interact with, and if you love taking a lot of game actions and winning the game through highly unusual means, well, I dare say you might be interested in some Enchantress. So, thank you, as always, for watching. Thank you as well to all people who support this content in any way, shape, or form. And thank you, as always, to my opponents. We have a sweet little play group that's all kind of learning Premodern together. It is a great time. So without any further ado, let's take a look at a list and see what Premodern Green-White Enchantress is up to. Alright guys, so I want to talk a little bit more big picture and a little bit less line by line than I'm usually doing in these types of deck techs. Here is why. So number one, Enchantress's presence. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card, and Argothian Enchantress. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card, in addition to other enchantments really matter cards like Serra's Sanctum, means that the sky is the limit between the amount of different colors that you can splash into this deck. Green-white is basically always going to be the core, but you can see people splashing one or two of the remaining three colors relatively frequently, and the fact that the fringiest or the most pet card enchantment that you can think of is more playable than it would otherwise be because it pays off with Sanctum and Presence and Argothian Enchantress, means that the list of playables is very, very, very high. So I wanted to mention that I will go line by line, but these cards and their choices are not set in stone by any means. And the other big picture thing I'd like to address. So I think the fact that Enchantress exists in this format, as in any format that it exists, is a great thing. I think the aesthetics of this deck are on point, and I'm glad that it's around because it's very, very unique. That said, compared to most other decks that I've featured, I actually don't care for it that much in terms of the actual play patterns. Those who have followed my content for a while will probably know why I favor depletion rather than resource generation as far as an enjoyable play pattern for me. And Enchantress, it presents Shroud on a lot of things, it presents insane value generation, drawing a ton of cards. It just makes for one of the less pleasant play experiences that I've had thus far in Premodern. That said, it's not among my top few most hated, so no big deal, and if you are going to have such a cluttered board, you might as well be looking at something beautiful, lovely, and aesthetic like this Green-White Enchantress deck. So that leads us into the basic lands. We have 4 planes done by Rob Alexander from Urza's Saga. I think thematically and artistically, these are the best fit of all of what I would consider the Premodern lands. It does compel us, if we want to match, to play an Urza's Saga Forest. Not my favorite, but definitely good enough and unique enough to not be totally letting us down. But we've got 4 Heath and 4 Brushland. A little bit of pain, but very necessary color fixing. You don't want to be thrown off of your curve for lack of color production, that is for sure. And Serra's Sanctum rounds out this land base, which is very simple, but very powerful with this inclusion. Many turns that are real go-off turns will see you maybe like your second or third spell you're casting with the help of Serra's Sanctum, and then several cantrips later, you are actually playing another Serra's Sanctum, of course sacking the tapped one and going off even further. It's really, really strong once it gets going. Okay, so now I'm going to jump around the curve a little bit. The first card to touch on is a 1-drop, but it's actually not one we'll play on turn 1 almost ever. Elephant Grass, cumulative upkeep 1, black creatures can't attack you. Non-black ones can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature that's attacking you, so this is your number one way to stave off not only hyper-aggressive decks, but any deck, really, that is playing creatures and trying to turn them sideways to win. This is absolutely crucial, and it might look a little bit rough, like can we really handle the upkeep, is this really where we want to be? You kind of have to play the deck to see just how necessary and powerful this card is. Wild Growth and Fertile Ground. We have playsets of each. We, of course, would prefer to enchant basic lands whenever possible for fear of wasteland and similar effects, but you really do want to see one of these in most opening hands unless you have a high land count and you know your opponent's on a slower deck. This acceleration is very, very powerful, and our Gothian Enchantress's presence. As mentioned, these are the core engine cards of the deck, making every single thing you're doing draw a card when you cast it. Note when you cast and when you cast. They're on cast triggers, so even if your opponent counters them, you are still cantripping. This is where the real power of the deck lies, make no mistake. By this point, you might be wondering, why no Enlightened Tutor? We have all of these different enchantments, wouldn't it be nice to tutor for them? Well, Sterling Grove just kinda does it better. You can play this out proactively, and this is a deck that plays proactively, generates permanents, generates a big board state, plays mostly at sorcery speed, so that kind of tricky aspect of Enlightened Tutor, not that relevant, and if it is, well, the activated ability of Sterling Grove that tutors things is just like an Enlightened Tutor. It's 1 mana and it's an instant speed, but the proactive kind of face-up mode of the card, if you will, gives everything Shroud, which is, if this wasn't good enough to have Shroud on our Gothian Enchantress, your cheapest engine card, now everything else is going to have Shroud too, and 2 Sterling Groves is a pretty hard lock against 1-for-1 interaction. Gonna go a little quickly through the remaining cards, because again, customizability is nearly infinite here, but we have 2 Explorations to play additional lands, which is really nuts when you're going off. 1 Miri's Guile for some card selection. We've got Sylvan Library for card selection and advantage at the potential cost of life. Ground Seal for some unusually templated graveyard hate that cantrips by itself, in addition to all the other cantripping we're doing. 2 copies of Seal of Cleansing. We know how prevalent artifacts and enchantments are in this format. You get to hose your opponent's enchantments while drawing off of your own Enchantments Matter board state. It doesn't get much more I win than that. We've got City of Solitude to prevent instant speed shenanigans from cramping our style. Solitary Confinement, which is an excellent tool against discard if you get it down early enough and you have a board state to support it. Also very good to stabilize against aggro, and one of our best cards against direct damage by way of combos, or, you know, other ways combos can kill you as long as they're trying to target you. Parallax Wave is a really interesting card. You can, of course, just use it kind of by itself to buy you some time against creature decks, but also with all of your removal, with all of the fading counters being removed, those abilities on the stack, you hold priority, destroy Parallax Wave with Seal of Cleansing, and up to 5 creatures will be exiled permanently. A nice little 5-for-2 exile effect. Seems really good. We've got Replenish if your opponent dares to interact with you, permission or discard especially. Well, guess what? You're just buying it right back. At the top end, we have Opalescence, which is yet another Enchantments Matter payoff, turning all non-aura enchantments into creatures with P and T equal to their mana value, and Sacred Mesa, which can be used a bit defensively if you're kind of in a close game, but really most of the time, by the time you land it, it's an insane mana sink that's going to make, at instant speed, a whole host of white Pegasi with flying to end the game. Many of these sideboard cards could be main decked, especially Humility, one of the hardest creature hate options out there. Worship is effectively an alternate win condition against decks that can't remove your Argothian Enchantress. Replenish number 3 against Interaction. Warmth and Circle of Protection red ×2 against Sly and other red decks. Aura of Silence for removal and or taxation against opposing artifacts and enchantments. We've got extra copies of Solitary Confinement, Sylvan Library, Ground Seal, and City of Solitude, which we already covered, and 2 copies of Karmic Justice. Very cool card, rounding it all out. Well, thank you very much for watching, my friends. I do indeed appreciate it. Let me know if you've got any super spicy Enchantress tech in the back pocket, whether it be a color splash or a hidden gem of a card or anything else. I look forward to seeing you, as always, for the next 10-minute deck tech. Until then, my friends, take care, and I'll talk to you soon.